The annual City Charity Gala was a battlefield disguised as a party. Emma Sullivan knew this better than anyone. For 3 years, she had navigated this glittering minefield as the executive assistant to Richard Thorne, a man whose ego was far larger than his company's market cap. Her job was to be invisible, efficient, and to anticipate his every need, which tonight mostly involved fetching him champagne and laughing politely at his terrible jokes. She stood a few feet behind him, a ghost in a simple but elegant navy dress, as he held court with a group of investors. "And that's when I told my assistant, Emma," Thorne said, gesturing vaguely in her direction without looking at her, "that if she couldn't even get me a tea time at the club, what was I even paying her for?" He laughed, a loud, braying sound, and the investors chuckled along nervously. A hot flush of humiliation crept up Emma's neck. It was a familiar feeling. Thorne loved to use her as a punchline, a way to assert his own importance by diminishing hers. She kept her expression neutral, a mask of professional calm she had perfected over years of enduring his casual cruelty. She needed this job. Her family depended on it. "Excuse me, Richard," one of the investors said, looking past Thorne, "but I believe Damien Blackwood is heading this way." The atmosphere shifted instantly. If Richard Thorne was a king in his own mind, Damien Blackwood was an emperor in reality. The CEO of Blackwood Industries was a legend, a ruthless, calculating billionaire who moved through the corporate world like a predator. He was devastatingly handsome, with dark, intense eyes and an aura of power that made the air around him seem to crackle. Thorne immediately straightened his tie, his bravado deflating slightly. "Damien, good to see you." Blackwood nodded curtly at Thorne, his gaze sweeping over the group before it landed, with unnerving focus, on Emma. For a fraction of a second, she felt like the only person in the room. Then, Thorne made his mistake. Seeing an opportunity to impress Blackwood, he turned to Emma. "Emma, be a dear and fetch Mr. Blackwood a glass of his preferred whiskey. I'm sure you can manage that, can't you?" It was a petty, public display of dominance. Before Emma could even respond, Damien Blackwood took a step forward. "That won't be necessary, Richard," Blackwood said, his voice a low, smooth baritone that cut through the chatter. He never took his eyes off Emma. "I was just coming over to steal your assistant for a dance." The entire group fell silent. Richard Thorne stared, his mouth slightly agape. Damien Blackwood held out his hand to Emma, his dark eyes challenging her. It was a rescue, a lifeline thrown in the middle of her public execution. Without a second thought, she placed her hand in his. It was warm and strong. "If you'll excuse us," Damien said, not as a question, as he led Emma away from the stunned group and toward the dance floor, leaving her boss looking foolish and dismissed. As he pulled her into his arms, the scent of expensive cologne and sheer power overwhelmed her. He was a masterful dancer, guiding her with an effortless confidence. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "You didn't have to do that." "Richard Thorne is a peacock," Damien murmured, his lips close to her ear. "Sometimes they need to have their feathers ruffled." He spun her elegantly, his hand firm on her back. "He doesn't appreciate you. An asset like you should be valued." The word asset should have felt cold, but coming from him, it sounded like the highest compliment. For the rest of the night, he treated her like a queen. He brought her champagne, introduced her to influential people as his brilliant companion, and listened with rapt attention when she spoke. For the first time, she felt seen, respected. At the end of the night, as the gala was winding down, he escorted her to a quiet, moonlit terrace overlooking the city. "Emma," he said, his voice serious now, "I wasn't just ruffling Thorne's feathers tonight. I was making an assessment. And I was right. You are wasted on him." He moved closer, his presence magnetic. "I'm going to make you a proposal. It's unconventional, but I believe it could be mutually beneficial." He explained the pressure he was under to present a stable, settled image to his board. He needed a fiancée for 6 months, a partner for social events. "I'm offering you a way out," he said, his gaze intense. "A way out from Thorn, a way out from the financial burdens I know your family is facing." He knew about her family. The admission was both terrifying and thrilling. "I will settle your family's debts. I will provide you with a life of luxury you can only imagine," he promised. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "All I ask in return is your complete loyalty, and perhaps some casual conversation about your old job. The inner workings of Thorn's company have always fascinated me." He said it so smoothly, so casually, that the implication was almost lost. Almost. But Emma was desperate. She was dazzled by him, by the dream he was offering, a way out, a rescue. She looked at the man who had treated her with more respect in one night than her boss had in 3 years. "I accept," she breathed, the words sealing her fate. A slow, satisfied smile touched Damien's lips. He had chosen his piece, placed her on the board, and the game had just begun. She didn't realize it yet, but she wasn't the queen he had treated her as all night. She was the pawn. Before we jump into the next chapter, I want to give a special shout-out to some of our wonderful listeners: Jessica from New York, Michael from Texas, and Ashley from California. You guys make this community so alive. Thank you for being here. And you, yes, you, where are you listening from? Share it in the comments, and maybe next time your name will get a shout-out too. Let's keep going. The next 24 hours were a whirlwind that felt more like a dream than reality. A discreet legal team arrived at Emma's small apartment with a contract and a cashier's check that made her mother weep with relief. Movers, impossibly efficient, packed her modest belongings. By evening, she was standing in the cavernous living room of Damien Blackwood's penthouse, a sleek, minimalist fortress of glass and chrome that overlooked the city like a god. It was magnificent, breathtaking, and utterly devoid of personal touches. It was the home of a man who controlled everything and connected with nothing. "Your room is in the East Wing," Damien said, his tone once again the cool, detached CEO she had read about, a stark contrast to the charming savior from the gala. "My quarters are in the West. We will maintain separate private lives. Publicly, however, we are a devoted couple. You will have a wardrobe and a stipend for any incidentals." He handed her a tablet. "This contains your schedule." "Our schedule," he corrected himself. "Social events, dinners, and a few key board meetings I'll need you to attend. Familiarize yourself with it." That evening, they had their first dinner together on a terrace that seemed to float among the stars. It was catered by a private chef, the food exquisite, the wine priceless. Damien was a different man again, charming, attentive, asking her about her childhood, her dreams of becoming an architect before she had to take the assistant job to support her family. He made her feel like the most fascinating woman in the world. Then, with the skill of a master interrogator, he seamlessly shifted the conversation. "I've always been impressed by Thorn's ability to launch projects so quickly," Damien mused, swirling the red wine in his glass. "He always seems to be one step ahead of the market analysis. How does he manage his project development? It must be a chaotic environment." He made it sound like professional curiosity, a fellow CEO admiring a rival's methods. Emma, lulled by the wine and the intoxicating feeling of being truly listened to, laughed. "Chaotic is an understatement. Richard is paranoid. He doesn't trust his own IT department." "Really?" Damien said, leaning forward slightly, his interest piqued. "He keeps all his most sensitive development projects completely off the company network," Emma explained, feeling a small, illicit thrill at sharing a secret from her old, miserable job. He calls it Project Phoenix. It's a separate air-gapped server system he runs out of a private data center. Only he and 2 of his most trusted engineers have access. She didn't share the location of the data center or the names of the engineers. It was just an anecdote, a piece of workplace gossip. But she saw it. Just for a fraction of a second, As she mentioned the name Project Phoenix, Damien's eyes lit up with a flash of triumphant, predatory light. It was a glint of steel, quickly masked by his charming smile. But she had seen it. He had gotten what he wanted. A sudden cold wave of unease washed over her. It felt as if she had just carelessly handed a master locksmith the key to a secret door. She pushed the feeling down. It was nothing. She was being paranoid. After all, she didn't work for Richard Thorne anymore. Her loyalty was to Damien now. "That's fascinating," Damien said, taking a slow sip of his wine, his expression once again relaxed and unreadable. "You're very observant, Emma. It's a valuable quality." The compliment was meant to soothe her, but the cold feeling lingered. She had the distinct, unsettling impression that she had just made her first move in a game she didn't even know she was playing. The next morning, 2 sleek black boxes were waiting for Emma on the marble island in the kitchen. Inside were the latest, top-of-the-line laptop and smartphone from Blackwood Industries' own tech division. "A welcome gift," Damien said as he entered the room, already dressed in a sharp, tailored suit. "To help you get settled and to make our communication more seamless." Emma knew, with a sinking feeling, that it was more than that. These devices weren't gifts. They were tools. His tools. She had spent enough time around powerful men to know that nothing came without a price, without a hidden purpose. She accepted them with a polite smile, her mind already racing. If he was going to monitor her, she would have to be smarter. The days that followed fell into a strange, intoxicating rhythm. Damien continued his subtle interrogations, weaving questions about Thorne's business practices into their casual dinner conversations. He was a master at it, making every query sound like idle curiosity. Emma, now wary, became a master of her own, learning to answer with just enough information to satisfy him without giving away anything truly critical. It became a dance, a high-stakes game of cat and mouse. And to her surprise, she found it exhilarating. At the same time, the lines of their business arrangement were becoming dangerously blurred. He took her to a private showing at an art gallery, and they spent hours debating the merits of abstract expressionism, their conversation sparking with an intellectual chemistry she had never experienced before. He discovered her love for old black and white films, and they spent a rainy Sunday in his private theater, watching Hitchcock movies and arguing about the endings. He was slowly, methodically, getting to know her, and she was getting to know the man behind the ruthless CEO, a man with a dry, unexpected wit, a brilliant mind, and a surprising appreciation for the arts. She was beginning to see the man she was supposed to be pretending to love, and the act was becoming terrifyingly easy. The true test came at a press event for a new Blackwood Industries subsidiary. It was a crowded, chaotic affair, with cameras flashing and reporters shouting questions. To maintain their public image as a devoted couple, they had to be convincing. "We should dance," Damien said, his voice low as he guided her toward the small dance floor set up for the guests. "The press will love it." He pulled her into his arms, and the familiar, electric jolt shot through her. This close, she could see the flecks of silver in his dark eyes, smell the clean, sharp scent of his cologne. The rest of the room, the cameras, the noise, it all faded away. "You're playing a dangerous game, Mr. Blackwood," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the music, testing him. He looked down at her, a slow, knowing smile playing on his lips. He leaned in, his breath warm against her ear. "The question is, Miss Sullivan," he murmured, his voice a low, husky rumble, "who's winning?" Before she could answer, he spun her around, dipping her low in a dramatic, theatrical move. The cameras flashed wildly. As he pulled her back up, his face was inches from hers. The air crackled with a tension that had nothing to do with the cameras, and then he kissed her. It was meant for the press, a public display to sell their story. But the moment his lips touched hers, all pretense vanished. It wasn't a chaste, polite kiss. It was deep, hungry, and breathtakingly real. It was a kiss that spoke of weeks of pent-up tension, of a grudging admiration that was turning into a dangerous attraction. He pulled away, his eyes dark with an emotion she couldn't decipher. They were both breathing heavily, their carefully constructed masks shattered. The kiss had been for show, but it had felt like a confession. And it left them both shaken, wondering where the game ended and reality began. The kiss at the press event changed everything. It was a crack in the flawless facade of their arrangement, and in the days that followed, neither of them knew how to repair it. A new, awkward tension settled between them. The easy banter was gone, replaced by a charged silence. They avoided being alone together, their conversations becoming brief and strictly professional, as if they were both terrified of the reality that single kiss had exposed. Damien threw himself back into his work with a vengeance, becoming the cold, distant CEO once more. But Emma could see the difference. She would catch him watching her from across the room, his expression a mixture of frustration and something else she couldn't name. The breaking point came unexpectedly. A week after the event, Emma woke up feeling dreadful. A fever had taken hold during the night, leaving her weak, aching, and shivering. She tried to power through it, to get dressed and maintain her perfect, competent facade, but by mid-morning she could barely stand. She collapsed back into bed, defeated. She expected a call from Damien, an impatient query about why she wasn't at her post. Instead, she heard a soft knock on her bedroom door. "Emma?" His voice was hesitant, uncertain. "I'm fine," she called out, her voice a weak, scratchy version of her own. "Just a little under the weather. I'll be up in a bit." The door opened anyway. Damien stood there, holding a tray with a glass of water, a bottle of fever-reducing medication, and a bowl of steaming broth. He was still in his suit, but his tie was loosened, his usual corporate armor slightly askew. "You're not fine," he stated, his eyes scanning her pale face and flushed cheeks with the practiced efficiency of a diagnostician. "You have a fever." He walked in, placing the tray on her bedside table. He didn't call for a doctor or his household staff. He simply took charge. "Sit up," he commanded, his voice firm but gentle. He helped prop her up with pillows, his hands surprisingly careful. He handed her the medication and the glass of water, waiting until she had swallowed them. "Now eat. You need to keep your strength up." Emma was too stunned to argue. She obediently sipped the warm, comforting broth, watching him as he moved around her room, drawing the curtains to dim the harsh light, adjusting the thermostat. He was completely out of his element, the master of the universe looking awkward and uncertain as he tried to perform these simple acts of care. He pulled a chair from her desk and sat beside the bed, a silent, watchful guardian. "You should be at work," she murmured, her eyelids feeling heavy. "I cancelled my meetings," he said simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. She was too weak to fight, too tired to question it. She drifted into a feverish sleep, and for the rest of the day, he was a constant, quiet presence. He would wake her gently to take more medication, to drink more water. At one point, she woke from a restless, fever-induced dream to find him placing a cool, damp cloth on her forehead, his touch incredibly gentle. Later that night, the fever finally began to break. She woke to find the room dark, save for the soft glow of a single lamp. Damien was still there, slumped in the chair, asleep. His head was tilted back, his face relaxed in sleep, stripped of its usual intensity. He looked younger, more vulnerable than she had ever seen him. A book lay open in his lap. He had been reading to her. She hadn't been dreaming it. She remembered snippets of his low, soothing voice, weaving stories from a book of classic myths he must have retrieved from the library. A wave of profound, overwhelming emotion washed over her. This cold, calculating man, this master manipulator, had spent his entire day caring for her with a tenderness she had never known. As she watched him, his breathing deep and even, he stirred in his sleep. He murmured something, his voice thick with slumber. "Shouldn't feel this way," he whispered to the empty sleeping room. "You were just the plan." Emma froze, every muscle in her body going rigid. The words, spoken in the unguarded honesty of sleep, hit her with the force of a physical blow. The plan. He had called her an asset. He had called her a partner. But in the deepest, most honest part of his mind, she was just the plan. A terrible, cold dread seeped into her bones, chilling her more than the fever ever had. She lay perfectly still, her eyes wide open in the darkness, her heart shattering into a million pieces. The man who had just shown her such incredible kindness was the same man who had orchestrated her entire life for his own gain. The word echoed in the silent room, a poison that tainted everything. Plan. The word plan became a splinter in Emma's mind, festering, poisoning every interaction. The next morning, her fever was gone, but it had been replaced by a chilling, clear-headed certainty. The kindness Damien had shown her, the moments of genuine connection, the breathtaking kiss. She now saw them all through a new, terrifying lens. Were they real, or were they just calculated moves in his game? She had to know. She returned to her duties, her professional mask perfectly in place. She was polite, efficient, and distant. Damien, seemingly relieved that she was well and that the awkward intimacy of the sick room was behind them, returned to his own cool, professional demeanor. But now, Emma was watching him, not as a woman falling in love, but as the executive assistant she had been trained to be. She was an expert at observing powerful men, at anticipating their needs, at understanding their secrets, and she turned all of that formidable skill on Damien. She paid attention to the way his eyes would flicker with interest when she accidentally let slip a detail about Thorne's old supply chain logistics. She noted the specific, targeted nature of his casual questions about Thorne's international partners. He wasn't just curious about his rival. He was mapping out his rival's entire corporate structure, using her as his guide. The final piece of the puzzle she needed was access. Her own laptop, the gift he had given her, felt like a spy in her hands. She knew anything she did on it would be monitored. But Damien had made one crucial mistake. In his arrogance, he had underestimated her. He had seen her as a competent assistant, a beautiful pawn. But he had never imagined she was as intelligent or as technically savvy as he was. One evening, while Damien was at a dinner she had begged off of, feigning a lingering headache, she put her own plan into motion. She went into his office. It was his inner sanctum, the one place he felt completely secure. She sat down at his personal desktop computer, the heart of his empire. It was, of course, password protected. But she had been studying him. She knew he was a man of logic and history, not sentiment. His safe code was 1805, the Battle of Trafalgar, a decisive, strategic victory. He wasn't a man who would use a birthday or a pet's name. He would use something that signified power and intellect. She tried a few combinations based on historical battles and famous strategists. Nothing. Then she stopped, thinking not about his interests, but about his ego. What was the one thing that defined him? The one thing he had built his entire identity around? She typed in a new password, Blackwood 1. The screen unlocked. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She had done it. For a moment, she felt a thrill of victory, quickly followed by a wave of nausea. She didn't want to be right. Her hands trembled as she navigated his private server. She didn't know what she was looking for, but she knew she would recognize it when she saw it. She bypassed folders labeled acquisitions, financials, and legal. Then she saw it. A folder protected by another layer of encryption, labeled simply, Project Nightingale. Nightingale, a songbird, a spy. Her blood ran cold. This time, she didn't have to guess the password. During one of their late-night conversations, he had told her about his first major corporate victory, the one that had put him on the map. The code name for that hostile takeover had been Ares. It was a pattern. He named his plans after mythological figures. She typed in the password, Nightingale 2023. The folder opened, and her world fell apart. It wasn't just a file, it was a complete dossier. On her, Emma Sullivan. It had been compiled months before the charity gala. It contained her photo, her employment history, her educational background. But it went deeper. It had her family's complete financial records, a detailed report on her mother's medical condition, notes on her strained relationship with Richard Thorne. It was a blueprint of her life, with every vulnerability, every pressure point, meticulously highlighted. And then she saw the final document, a strategy memo written in Damien's own sharp, decisive style. The objective was clear, stated in cold corporate language. Objective: acquire Thorne International via hostile takeover. Phase 1 requires access to proprietary data related to Project Phoenix. Method: identify and leverage key personnel. Target: Emma Sullivan, executive assistant. Sullivan is competent, undervalued, and under significant financial and personal duress. She is the ideal asset. Execution: engineer a rescue scenario at a public event. Establish a contract-based personal relationship, e.g., fake engagement, to ensure loyalty and proximity. Exploit relationship to subtly extract necessary intelligence. Once Project Phoenix is compromised, initiate takeover. Sullivan becomes a disposable asset. Disposable asset. The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. The rescue at the gala, the contract, the carefully orchestrated conversations, the kindness when she was sick. It was all there. A plan. A cold, calculated, ruthless plan. She wasn't a person to him. She was an asset, a tool, a key to be used and then discarded. She sat there, frozen in his chair, the glow of the screen illuminating the silent tears streaming down her face. The fairy tale was a lie. The connection she felt was a manipulation. The man she was falling in love with didn't exist. She heard the soft chime of the private elevator arriving in the penthouse. She heard the front door open. He was home. She didn't move. She didn't close the file. She just sat there, her heart a gaping, bleeding wound, and waited for the man who had so masterfully orchestrated her destruction to walk in and see what he had done. The sound of his footsteps on the marble floor was steady, confident, the sound of a king returning to his castle. Emma didn't turn. She just stared at the screen, at the words disposable asset, letting them burn into her soul. Damien walked into his study, a small, pleased smile on his face from a successful evening. "Emma, I thought you'd be asleep," he began. The smile vanished the instant he saw her. He saw her sitting in his chair, her body rigid. He saw the tears glistening on her cheeks in the glow of his monitor, and he saw the open file, the Project Nightingale memo, displayed for her to see. Every ounce of color drained from his face. The master strategist, the man who was always 10 steps ahead, had made a fatal error. He had been so consumed by his growing feelings for her that he had forgotten the cold, hard evidence of his own treachery. "Emma," he said, his voice a strangled whisper. He took a step toward her, his hand outstretched. "Don't," she said, her voice terrifyingly quiet, devoid of all its usual warmth. She finally turned to look at him, and the look in her eyes was one of pure, shattered devastation. "Don't you dare touch me." "It's not what you think," he began, the words sounding weak and pathetic even to his own ears. "Isn't it?" she asked, a bitter, broken laugh escaping her lips. "It seems perfectly clear to me. Identify and leverage key personnel. Ideal asset. Disposable asset. Is there any part of that I'm misunderstanding, Damien?" The use of his first name was a slap in the face, a rejection of any intimacy, real or feigned, that had existed between them. "That was the beginning," he said, his voice desperate. "That was the plan, yes, but it changed. The moment I met you, It started to change. When? She shot back, standing up, her body trembling with a rage born of deep, profound hurt. When did it change? Was it before or after you put a tracking device in my phone? Was it before or after you asked me about Project Phoenix over a romantic dinner? Was it before or after you held my hand while I was sick, knowing you were the architect of my entire life? Every word was a dagger, and everyone hit its mark. He had no defense. Everything she said was true. I fell in love with you, he said, the words raw and desperate. I know it started as a lie, but what I feel for you now, it's real. Emma, please, you have to believe me. Believe you? She cried, the tears finally breaking free, streaming down her face. How? How can I ever believe a single word that comes out of your mouth again? Your entire world is built on lies and manipulation. You see people as assets, as pawns on your chessboard. She gestured wildly between the two of them. How do I know that this right now isn't just another move in your game? A new strategy to keep your asset compliant now that she's discovered the truth. The accusation struck him harder than any physical blow. He saw in her eyes that he had so perfectly constructed her prison of lies that he had left himself no way out. He had made himself untrustworthy. What we have, he started, his voice breaking. We have nothing, she screamed, the sound echoing in the cold, sterile office. We have a contract based on a lie, a relationship built on deceit. You didn't rescue me, Damien. You just put me in a prettier cage. She walked over to his desk, her movements stiff, robotic. With trembling fingers, she slid the heavy diamond ring from her finger, the symbol of their fake engagement, the beautiful, glittering lie. She placed it on the polished surface of his desk, next to the keyboard that had revealed his betrayal. The sound was a small, final click in the deafening silence. Our contract is broken, she said, her voice now hollow, empty of all emotion. She turned and walked toward the door, not looking back. Emma, wait, he pleaded, his voice filled with a panic he had never felt before. Don't go. We can fix this. She paused at the door, her back still to him. There's nothing to fix, she whispered. There was never anything real to break. And then she was gone, leaving him standing alone in the heart of his empire. He had won his war against Richard Thorne. He had achieved his objective. But in doing so, he had just lost the only thing he had belatedly, foolishly realized he couldn't live without. Hey dear, don't forget to hit subscribe and help us grow. Thank you for being here. Emma walked out of the penthouse and never looked back. She didn't go back to her old apartment. She couldn't. It felt like a relic from a life that no longer existed. Instead, she called the only person she could, a friend from college, and crashed on her sofa. Her entire world condensed into a single hastily packed overnight bag. For Damien, the days that followed were a special kind of hell. The penthouse, once a symbol of his power and control, now felt like a vast, empty tomb. Every room, every object, was a reminder of her. The book of myths he had read to her, left on the bedside table in her room. The half-empty bottle of wine from a night they had spent talking on the terrace. The scent of her perfume that seemed to linger in the air. He was haunted. His first instinct was to use his power, to find her, to force her to listen, to fix this the way he fixed everything, with money and influence. But her words echoed in his mind. How can I ever believe a single word that comes out of your mouth again? He knew she was right. Any grand gesture would be seen as another manipulation. So he did the only thing he knew how to do. He executed the plan. With the information Emma had unknowingly provided, compromising Project Phoenix was brutally efficient. Damien launched his hostile takeover of Thorne International. It was a masterclass in corporate warfare. Within a week, Richard Thorne's company was in ruins, its stock had plummeted, and the board, facing financial annihilation, voted to accept Blackwood Industries' acquisition offer. The business world celebrated Damien's victory. He was on the cover of every financial magazine, hailed as a genius, a visionary, a king who had conquered another kingdom. He attended the final board meeting at Thorn International, a victor accepting the spoils of war. But as he sat in the chair that had once belonged to his rival, he felt nothing. The victory was hollow, tasteless. It meant nothing without her. Meanwhile, Richard Thorn, stripped of his company, his power, and his pride, was consumed by a bitter, vengeful rage. He knew he had been outplayed, but he couldn't figure out how Blackwood had gotten to Project Phoenix. Then he remembered the gala. He remembered Blackwood's sudden, inexplicable interest in his mousy, unassuming assistant. He found Emma's new address through a private investigator. He waited for her outside her friend's apartment building, his face a mask of smug, malicious satisfaction. "Well, well, well," he said as she approached, making her freeze in her tracks. "The little bird who flew the coop." "What do you want, Richard?" Emma asked, her voice tired. "I just wanted to congratulate you," he sneered. "It was you, wasn't it? You were his weapon all along. He saw you, a pathetic, desperate little thing, and knew you'd be the perfect tool to get what he wanted." He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "He played you perfectly, made you feel special, rescued you, and you fell for it. You gave him everything he needed to destroy me. Congratulations, Emma. You were the best, most effective tool he's ever used." The words, though spoken with malice, were a confirmation of her worst fears. She had been a weapon, a tool. She said nothing, simply pushing past him and walking into the building, his mocking laughter following her down the hall. Damien found out about Thorn's visit that evening. One of the security men he had secretly assigned to watch over Emma from a distance reported the encounter. A cold, terrifying fury, colder than any he had felt during his corporate battles, washed over him. Thorn had not only lost, but in his final, pathetic act of spite, he had gone after Emma. He had poured salt in the very wound Damien had created. In that moment, Damien realized the true extent of his failure. In his quest to destroy one enemy, he had created a permanent, unbreachable wall between himself and the only person he had ever truly loved. The news of Thorn's visit sent Damien into a state of cold fury, but it was quickly replaced by a profound, aching despair. He had done this. His game, his manipulation, had not only hurt Emma, but had left her exposed to the final, spiteful attacks of a ruined man. His first instinct was to retaliate, to use his immense power to crush what was left of Richard Thorn, to erase him from the face of the earth. But he stopped himself. More power plays, more aggression, would only prove Emma's point. It would only make him more of the monster she believed him to be. He tried to reach her. He called, but she never answered. He sent flowers to her friend's apartment, extravagant bouquets that were promptly refused at the door. He had a piece of jewelry delivered, a stunning diamond necklace from a designer she had once admired, but the box was returned to his office the next day, unopened. He was a man who could move markets, topple corporations, and bend entire industries to his will, but he was utterly powerless to get the one woman he loved to even speak to him. Money, power, luxury, the tools he had always used to get what he wanted, were useless. They were part of the poison, not the antidote. He realized he had to do something completely out of character. He had to show her, not tell her, that he was changing. He had to prove that he understood the depth of his betrayal. A few days later, a black car pulled up in front of the modest suburban home where Emma's parents lived. Damien Blackwood stepped out, not in one of his usual power suits, but in simple dark trousers and a cashmere sweater. He looked less like a corporate titan and more like a man on his way to a funeral. He knocked on the door, his heart pounding in his chest with a nervousness he hadn't felt since his very first business deal. Emma's father opened the door. He recognized Damien immediately, his face a mixture of shock, confusion, and a father's protective anger. "What do you want?" Mr. Sullivan asked, his voice firm, blocking the doorway. "Sir," Damien began, his own voice humbled, stripped of its usual command. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here because I need to talk to you and your wife." It's about Emma. He spent the next hour sitting in their small, tidy living room, a place so filled with warmth and genuine love that it felt like a foreign country to him. He confessed everything. He told them about his ruthless plan to destroy Thorne, about how he had identified Emma as a tool, about the fake engagement, the manipulation, the lies. He didn't spare himself. He laid his sins bare on their coffee table. And then he told them how he had fallen in love with her. He spoke of her intelligence, her strength, her integrity. He told them how she had made him feel, how she had broken through the walls he had built around himself, and how his own arrogance and deceit had shattered everything. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said, his voice raw with an emotion he rarely showed. "I don't deserve it. But I need you to know that I love your daughter, more than I have ever loved anything. And I will spend the rest of my life trying to become a man who is worthy of her." He stood up to leave, thanking them for their time. He didn't ask them to intervene. He didn't ask them to plead his case. He just needed them to know the truth from his own lips. After he left, Emma's mother picked up the phone. She called Emma, who answered on the first ring, her voice filled with worry. "Mom? Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine, sweetheart," her mother said, her voice gentle. "But you need to come home. There's a very sorry, very foolish, and very much in love young man who just left here. And I think maybe you should hear what he has to say." Her mother's words echoed in her mind for 2 days. Emma was torn. A part of her, the wounded, betrayed part, wanted to stay hidden, to nurse her broken heart in solitude. But another more persistent part, the part that still ached for the man she had seen behind the mask, was filled with a flicker of hope. He had gone to her parents. He hadn't used his power or his money. He had used humility. It was the most un-Damien-like thing he could have done, and it was the only thing that could have possibly gotten her attention. She agreed to meet him. She chose the location, a quiet, unassuming public park in the middle of the city, a neutral ground far from the world of penthouses and boardrooms. She arrived first, sitting on a simple wooden bench, watching children play on a nearby swing set. He arrived a few minutes later, on foot. He wasn't flanked by security. He was just a man, dressed in simple jeans and a dark coat, looking completely out of place and profoundly nervous. He saw her and stopped a few feet away, as if unsure if he was allowed to approach. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice quiet. "My mother can be very persuasive," she replied, her tone guarded. He didn't try to sit down. He just stood there, a respectful distance away. He wasn't holding flowers or a gift box. He was holding a thick, leather-bound portfolio. "I know words are meaningless from me right now," he began, his voice raw and honest. "I know I broke your trust completely, so I'm not going to try to talk my way out of this. I'm here to show you." He stepped forward and placed the portfolio on the bench beside her. "This is for you." She looked at him, then down at the portfolio. Hesitantly, she opened it. It wasn't a legal document. It wasn't a bank statement. It was a deed. The deed to the newly acquired, and now completely defunct, Thorne International. Except the name had been changed. The company was now legally registered as Sullivan Enterprises. Emma stared at the document, her heart pounding. "What is this?" "It's yours," he said simply. "I don't want it. I never did. The victory was empty. It's a company built on the pain of others, and I want no part of it." He took a deep breath. "But before it's dismantled, I want you to do something. I want you to walk into that building, into your old office, and I want you to personally fire Richard Thorne. He needs to see that the tool he so casually dismissed is now the one holding all the power." He wasn't finished. "And then," he continued, his voice filled with a quiet intensity, "I want you to use the company's remaining assets to create a compensation fund. A fund for every employee Thorne mistreated, underpaid, or wrongfully dismissed over the years. I want you to be the one to deliver the justice they all deserve. The justice you deserve. She looked up at him, stunned into silence. This was not a gift of money. This was a gift of power. Her power. He wasn't trying to buy her forgiveness. He was handing her the sword, trusting her to wield it. He was making himself vulnerable, placing the fate of his billion-dollar acquisition entirely in her hands. It was an act of complete and utter trust, an act of atonement. She saw the man behind the CEO, not just vulnerable and in love, but desperate to prove he could be better. Desperate to be the man she needed him to be. Tears welled in her eyes, but this time, they were not tears of pain or betrayal. They were tears of a dawning, fragile hope. "This doesn't change what you did, Damien," she said, her voice trembling. "I know," he replied, his own voice thick with emotion. "I know it doesn't. But I hope it shows you the man I want to be. For you." The next day, Emma Sullivan walked through the glass doors of her old office building. She was not the same woman who had scurried through these halls, trying to make herself invisible. She was dressed in a sharp, elegant power suit, her posture confident, her expression calm and resolute. Damien was with her, but he walked a step behind, a silent, supportive presence. He was not the CEO of Blackwood Industries today. He was, as he had put it, her senior advisor. The power in the room belonged entirely to her. The news of their arrival spread through the office like wildfire. Whispers and stunned stares followed them as they walked directly to the CEO's office on the top floor. Richard Thorne was sitting behind his desk, his former desk, when they entered without knocking. He looked up, his face a mask of arrogant disbelief. "What is the meaning of this?" he blustered, standing up. "You can't just barge in here." "And you," he sneered, pointing a finger at Emma. "You have some nerve showing your face here after what you did." Emma didn't flinch. She walked calmly to the desk and placed the portfolio containing the new company deed on its polished surface. She slid it across to him. "It's Sullivan Enterprises now, Richard," she said, her voice cool and even. "And this is no longer your office." Thorne stared at the document, his face turning a shade of mottled purple as the reality of his situation crashed down on him. He had been utterly, completely defeated. "You," he stammered, looking from the deed to Damien, who stood silently by the door. "You did this." "No," Emma said, correcting him. "You did this to yourself. Your arrogance, your cruelty, the way you treated the people who worked for you. It all led to this moment." She looked him straight in the eye, savoring the moment she had dreamed of. "Richard Thorne, your employment with this company is terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building." Thorne, defeated and speechless, could only stare at her, the woman he had dismissed as a nobody, the tool who had just dismantled his entire life. He made one last pathetic attempt to wound her. "He'll get tired of you," he spat, gesturing toward Damien. "A man like that always does." A small, confident smile touched Emma's lips. "The difference, Richard," she said, her voice clear and strong, "is that I never needed him, but he seems to think he needs me." After security had escorted a sputtering, humiliated Richard Thorne from the building, a profound silence settled over the office. The victory was complete. It was hers. Emma sank into the large leather CEO chair, the chair she had so often stood before, feeling small and insignificant. She had done it. Damien walked over to the desk, his eyes filled with a look of pure, unadulterated adoration. He leaned against it, looking down at her. "How does it feel?" he asked softly. "It feels," she said, a slow smile spreading across her face, "like justice." He smiled back, a genuine warm smile that reached his eyes. The tension of the past few weeks seemed to melt away, leaving only the two of them in the quiet office. The war was over. "So," he said, his voice a low, hopeful murmur, "what do we do now?" Emma leaned back in the ridiculously large CEO chair, the leather cool against her back. She looked at Damien, at the man who had orchestrated her life and then handed her the power to reclaim it. The victory over Thorn was sweet, but it was a hollow prize if the future remained unwritten. "Now," she said, her voice quiet but firm, her gaze holding his. "Now we talk. No games, no plans, no corporate strategy. Just you and me." He nodded, his expression serious. He pulled up a chair, not the imposing one behind the desk, but a simple visitor's chair, and sat opposite her. For the first time, they were truly on equal footing. "I'm listening," he said, and so she began. She laid her heart bare, not with the screaming rage of their last confrontation, but with a raw, painful honesty. She told him about the humiliation she felt that first night at the gala, and the dizzying hope he had given her. She described the cold dread she felt every time he asked about Thorn, the feeling of being a pawn in a game she didn't understand. She told him about the soul-crushing devastation of finding the file, of seeing the words, "disposable asset." "You didn't just lie to me, Damien," she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. "You made me question my own judgment, my own feelings. You made the most real connection I've ever felt feel like a symptom of my own foolishness." He didn't interrupt. He didn't make excuses. He just listened, his face a mask of profound gut-wrenching guilt. He absorbed every word, every ounce of her pain, as if it were a punishment he knew he deserved. When she was finished, a heavy silence filled the room. "You're right," he said finally, his voice hoarse. "Everything you've said is true. There is no excuse for what I did. I was arrogant, and I was a coward." He looked at her, his own vulnerability now laid bare. "The truth is, Emma, I've spent my entire life building walls, seeing people as threats or assets. It's how I survived my childhood. It's how I built my empire. Control was the only thing that made me feel safe." He took a shaky breath. "And then you came along. You didn't fawn over my money. You weren't intimidated by my power. You challenged me. You made me laugh. You made me feel human. And it terrified me. The plan was my shield. As long as you were just the plan, I could keep you at a distance. I could tell myself I was in control." He leaned forward, his eyes pleading. "But it was a lie. I lost control the moment I met you. I love you, Emma. I know I started this in the worst way imaginable, a way that may be unforgivable. But my feelings for you are the only truly real thing that has happened to me in years. Please," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Give me a chance to prove it to you. A real chance." She looked at him, at this brilliant, powerful, broken man who was finally, truly surrendering. The anger in her heart had been replaced by a deep, aching empathy. She had wanted honesty, and he had given it to her, in all its painful, ugly truth. "One chance," she said, her voice soft but clear as a bell. "But it will be on my terms." A wave of relief so profound it was almost painful washed over his face. "Anything," he said. "Our new contract," she continued, a small, determined smile playing on her lips, "will have no clauses, no fine print, just one rule." "What is it?" he asked, ready to agree to anything. "Total honesty," she said, her gaze unwavering. "Always, no matter how difficult. No more games, no more secrets." He stood up, walked around the desk, and knelt before her, taking her hands in his. He looked up at her, his eyes shining with a promise that was more binding than any legal document. "I accept," he said, his voice thick with emotion. She leaned forward, and he met her halfway. They kissed, not with the fiery passion of their first kiss or the desperation of their last, but with a new, tender reverence. It was a kiss that sealed a new deal, a new beginning, a contract of the heart. 1 year later, the sleek, modern office that had once belonged to Richard Thorn was unrecognizable. The dark, imposing furniture was gone, replaced by bright, open-plan workspaces. The walls were adorned with vibrant art from local artists. It was no longer the headquarters of a defunct corporation. It was the bustling home of the Sullivan Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to providing legal aid and financial support to victims of corporate malpractice. At the head of the large conference table, Emma Sullivan led a board meeting, her voice confident and clear as she outlined their next major initiative. She was no longer an assistant, but a respected leader, a force for good in the city, admired for her sharp intellect and her unwavering compassion. Sitting at the other end of the table, Damian Blackwood watched her, not as a benefactor or a mentor, but as an equal partner on the foundation's board. A proud, almost reverent smile touched his lips. He had given her the keys to a ruined kingdom, and she had built a vibrant, thriving republic in its place. Later that evening, they stood on the terrace of their penthouse. The space, once so cold and minimalist, was now filled with touches of Emma's personality. Potted plants and comfortable chairs softened the hard edges. A bookshelf filled with novels stood where a sterile piece of modern art had once been. It was no longer a fortress, it was a home. Damian came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder as they looked out at the glittering city lights. "You were brilliant today," he murmured, his voice a low, warm rumble against her ear. "I had a good advisor," she replied, leaning back against his chest. They stood in a comfortable, peaceful silence for a long moment. The games were long over, the secrets all laid bare. What was left was a quiet, steady love built on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect. "I'm glad my plan went so wrong," he whispered, pressing a soft kiss to her hair. She turned in his arms to face him, a playful, knowing smile on her face. She reached up and straightened his tie, a gesture that was once part of her job, but was now an act of simple, loving intimacy. "It was," she said, her eyes sparkling, "the best deal you ever made." He smiled, a genuine, happy smile that still made her heart skip a beat. He leaned in and kissed her, not with the fire of their first tumultuous encounters, but with the deep, abiding warmth of a love that was real, earned, and built to last. They were no longer pieces in a game, but partners in a life they had chosen and built together. Our story ends here, my dear, but many more are waiting for you. Subscribe, tell me in the comments what you felt about this one, and we'll meet again very soon. Thank you, and see you in the next story.